Welcome to Step Up, where we learn from the best of the best in business. I'm David Wolf, producer of the program, and now I'd like to introduce your host, speaker psychologist, supporter of military families, and sassy grandmother, Dr. Margarita Gurry.
Well, hi, David Wolf. We have another David here, Dave Bricker, one of my favorite grown-ups in all the world.
Beautiful.
Welcome, Dave Bricker.
Pleasure to be here.
Great to meet you, Dave.
Even more of a pleasure to have you here. So I'm excited today because Step Up is all about helping entrepreneurs with different mindsets and different skills. And you have some interesting mindsets and skills that I thought we could share with the audience. So let me just start with saying entrepreneurs everywhere, they succeed by connecting with people, hopefully in sustainable ways for business. You have this secret skill set that many people do not have, which is all about connecting with people with story. Please tell us a little bit about your story sailing.
Story sailing it comes from my background. When I was a young man, I fell head over backwards into an interesting life opportunity, as it turns out to be the way my life works. I met some people who lived on sailboats, who traveled all over the world. I was a private prep school kid headed for law school or some god-awful place like that. And these people pulled me into something completely different. By the time I graduated college, I owned a 26-foot sailboat, and I filled it up with dreams and a very little bit of money. I took off across the Gulf Stream to the Bahamas, scared to death, and I went out in search of stories because the wealth that these people had that I didn't have, they traveled all over the world. They'd had wonderful adventures. They dealt with storms and calms and groundings, and I wanted stories too. So I went out and got stories, sailed around the Bahamas, sailed across the Atlantic, got in and out of trouble, and came back with plenty of stories, which led me to begin to wonder, why are stories so powerful and interesting and connecting, and how do they work? And the model I developed for that is something I call story sailing.
I love that name.
Very cool.
So, but what does story sailing have to do with the entrepreneur in the audience?
Well, it starts beyond business. And I'm not a great believer that there is a firm division between business and personal life. I think there's just life. So we begin life assembling a picture of the world, and we build it out of people and places and things and actions and reactions. And these become nouns and verbs and characters and all of the building blocks of story. So everything we do in life is really connected to story. Story is the way we process information. And I'm not sure who said it, but there's a school of thought that everything in life and literature we do in the pursuit of meaning. And nobody knows what meaning is, but it's like love, God, and pornography. We know it when we see it. And so what is meaning? What is meaning? It's what we're trying to make in life. It's what we're trying to make in relationships, and it's what we're trying to make in business. Because many of us have had jobs that paid well, but that drove us crazy because what we were spending our time on. And it's no mistake that we use the word spending in association with time. We're spending our time on non-meaningful activities.
But our audience is busy. They're trying to be entrepreneurs that make an impact in this world, and better yet, a bottom line. Why should they spend their precious time on stories?
Because the study of stories will help them make money while having that meaningful impact. Because making money is not meaningful enough. Having an impact is, and many people will actually choose the meaningful pursuit over the profitable pursuit.
So in other words, as we communicate our business objectives, our strategies to an audience, to pull them in, to fill the funnel, whatever this business objective looks like, Dave, the idea here is that if there's an emotional connection that needs to be made, and that happens through story, the meaning we're seeking through storytelling, right?
Absolutely. And so we look for outcomes. And we look for meaningful outcomes. So if you're in business to make widgets and you produce widgets, well, that's great, but that's not a meaningful outcome. if you produce widgets that make people's lives easier, that save them time, that make them money, or that give them status, now you're not just making widgets, you're making a difference in the people you serve. And that simple reframing of that story can have a huge impact on you, your team, your marketing, your message, everything about how you connect and engage with customers and colleagues is affected by the way you frame your story.
So what is the connection between marketing and story sailing?
Well, I like to feel that a story moves along a horizontal axis, much as a sailboat moves from the rocky and stormy seas of conflict to the safe port of transformation. And businesses need to think of their clients' stories. What troubles, what problems, what challenges does the client have? But also, what goals do they want to achieve? What does happily ever after look like for their customer? What does success look like for the customer? When it comes to marketing, too many people are trying to talk about the conflicts, and they're not really selling the outcome. And that's where people are finding meaning. And that's where advertising becomes meaningful.
And what's interesting about that, Dave, is you do hear a lot of so-called sales or copywriters find the pain point. And you just really made a distinction there. Yeah, there's a pain point. Yeah, I'm trying to solve a problem, but let's sell an outcome. Let's talk and use creative visualization. I think that's where you're going with that, right?
Yeah, they're very much a yin and a yang. But for example, take an insurance company advertisement, and we see pictures of crashed cars and burned houses. Nobody's going to buy
Sorry, I'm
that.
laughing. Yes. It's somehow it's funny, but it's
not that those messages are funny, but the idea that you use them to sell something is, well, comedy is not pretty, right?
Right.
So when I work with marketing companies and advertisers, I try to teach them to focus on the outcome. You buy insurance so that you can feel safe and secure and protected, not because you're afraid your house is going to blow up. It's why anti-cigarette ads fail for the same reason.
Right. They're selling using fear to sell as opposed to using the desired outcome.
Exactly.
So you are really quick on your feet, so I'm going to throw something at you. David Wolf has a very interesting business model. So I was hoping you could just chat with him briefly here online and help him come up with what would be a story he could use that would help him get more clients and have clients understand better what it is that he does for them.
Well, this story where the consultant gets trapped into offering free services in its interview is a brilliant. No, I'm only kidding you.
That's a hell of a framework, and it makes a great story.
You can cut that if you want.
The story of stepping up. Thank you, Margarita. That's very generous of you. But I don't want to expect free value unless.
Normally, you'd have to pay him a lot of money. Hey, let me throw you a bone here. Right. So, David Bricker, give us a quick example, because I think it's a really brilliant idea, the idea of helping people connect with the business idea, with the business owner, with the product, the outcomes. So give us just a brief example of the kinds of things anyone needs to think about when they're going to use your services or even work on their own stories.
So having started this, I guess there's a certain amount of leading the witness that's inherent in the process. But I guess I would start by framing the questions. For example, somebody who is going to do marketing for you or help you market yourself might say, tell me what you do. And I would say, tell me what you do for your clients. What outcomes do you produce for your clients? What are the benefits?
That's excellent. And so then what does he do in terms of stories with that? So he maybe makes a list of the benefits, and then what? What's the next step in this? Because you have this model. What's the next step in the process?
Right. So I would want to understand what the benefits were, and I would want to understand what the challenges were. I would like to understand how you move your clients from conflict to transformation, so that what happens now, let's call that the horizontal axis. The sailboat sails across the water in a horizontal fashion. Now, that water's got to be deep enough or the boat's going to run aground, which means your message is not going to, quote unquote, hold water. Notice all of these water metaphors are inherent. Is it deep enough? Is the argument shallow? Does the story hold water? This is deep archetypal psychological stuff that's associated with water, which to me is part of why the story sailing metaphor works. So if you as a business understand the client's unique challenges, the challenge can't be my clients have money they want to get rid of and I'm here to help them part with it. That's not a very authentic marketing, not an authentic business challenge that they need to deal with. But if you understand their needs and can communicate very quickly that you're part of their culture, that you get what they do, that you feel their pain, then you get some gravitas, some cachet to be trusted to guide them from conflict to transformation. So we have that horizontal axis, and at the bottom is, or the vertical axis at the bottom is authenticity. And at the top of the vertical axis is magic. And here's where a lot of people go, oh, great, this was making a lot of sense. I could buy the storytelling thing. I got out of children's books and I'm buying storytelling. Why is this guy talking about magic? But Margarita, as a speaker, when you go into a room and you talk for 45 minutes, and after 45 minutes, 100 or 200 or 500 people in a room have a different perspective on how they're going to go to work the next day, that's magic. Yes. If you design, if I typeset a book and somebody opens that book and goes, wow, this looks great. I can't wait to read it just because of the way it looks. If a photographer takes a headshot and I had someone great take my headshots, and I had a client tell me they hired me because they loved my headshot and they thought that they could trust me and wanted to work with me.
Well, I love your headshot too. I think it's really just very natural.
These are all they're intangibles in a sense, aren't they?
They're intangibles. So I guess what I would say is beyond the outcomes that you produce for your client, What is the unique David Wolf strategy? What makes you different from all of the other people who sell the same widgets? What's your magic? And
David?
I'm going to handle that as a rhetorical now.
No, David, what's your magic? Let's do it now.
So there are a couple different pieces to my business. I have to contextualize what I do. So at the core, I'm deeply rooted in my experience as a musician, an entrepreneur, and I think a creative guy, right? So I have a sense of creative solution finding. The work I did.
Feel your pain.
Exactly. The work I did for years was, for the advertising agencies, for children's publishing, for all kinds of dealing in the abstract, which is probably the most subjective and difficult sort of framework to deal in because, you're selling the next piece of music that you haven't written yet. So for me, the inherent in the business I found myself in for many years, and I'm not directly in that today, but this is a little bit of backstory for Dave and for the audience. This is the world I lived in. I was selling an abstract solution to help them glue together several elements in their marketing puzzle. So the why me, now I apply it to producing audiobooks, I produce podcasts, and I'm also launching systems for amplifying or the distribution of content in the form of internet radio combined with a mobile app. So these are the things I work on today. I don't know that I can directly... this is my answer to the question, at least in the moment, but I'm getting a lot out of the idea of the idea that we sell the story solution as opposed to here's what you get in a basket of features. Here's what it'll do, bullet point benefits. I mean, it really needs to come alive, doesn't it? And I think that's part of what you're talking about.
So I think where I would push you now, if we were in a session,
right,
is I'd say, okay, look, and I'm a musician too. I've played guitar for 35 years. It's my drug, and I do it every day, and I love it.
Right.
So look at the iTunes world. A tune costs $1, usually less than $1 if you buy the whole album. So music has been commoditized. And if I went to you and I said, write me an original song and I'll pay you $1 for it, that's a business model that only works when you're selling hundreds of thousands of units at a time. So for the independent business producer, that's a tough sell. But now imagine that you're going to write a jingle for a company that is going to make their message memorable. That's like creating a logo. As a graphic designer, there are plenty of people, they want to go on a crowdsourcing site and they want to get a logo for $75. And you've got a bunch of kids in Farawayistan who've got bootleg copies of Photoshop and the big book of logos, and they make a bunch of designs, and somebody wins. You get the commodity, but you don't get the value. Whereas somebody who charges real money for a logo, who can get down and understand the zeitgeist of the business and convey it with a simple mark, that's magic. Pure magic, by the way. You can never explain how it works. A jingle does the same thing. Right. If you're scoring a film, the audience will react to what's going on the screen in ways that you can't quantify. It's magic. And then what's it worth? The value is clearly more than $1. And we get into this pairing of meaning and value.
Well, you're describing...
Let's go back. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to respond briefly. You're describing the exact reason for my prior success during the years I was writing original music for film, radio, and television. And that's exactly, when I walked through the door, this was a relationship I had with the filmmaker, with the producer, with the director, with the art director, if it was an ad agency, with the copywriter. A much more integrated kind of approach than simply going shopping for a piece of library music, if you will, or stock images, if you will, which is the world. It has devolved into that kind of a much more commoditized solution-seeking environment, ecosystem, maybe a better word, right? So I think you're pointing to a few things there. The value of original creativity and how to talk about it and how to language it. And then also the idea that we're living in a world where there's a race to the bottom on the commoditization of what used to be very original.
Absolutely.
Margarita, well, let's go back to magic. I think magic is important. So one of the things I see clients doing, and I know you, Dave, you and I have talked about it quite a bit when we're talking about storytelling, whether it's by ourselves or with our friend Caro de Posada or Kelly Swanson, who's also a storyteller. One of the things we think about is that people sometimes have trouble finding their own stories. So just then we found David Wolf's story, but with what he used to do. Now he does this podcast media stuff. And I think he hasn't really found his story all the way with you yet. In real life, perhaps he's found it, but I don't think so. And so I have some ideas, but what are the tips you give someone like David Wolf, who offers a lot of value, has a lot of magic, but hasn't really found the story all the way, or hasn't told it yet anyway? Well, what do you advise, sir?
Well, I think that the conundrum that faces a lot of creative people, they sell songs all day for $1 and they wait tables all night. And the state of the creative professions is very much, as David says, this sort of race to the bottom of the tank of commoditization. But what you're describing to me is storytelling, because you don't sell songs. Take a film scorer, a famous film scorer like Hans Zimmer. Well, you can contract him to compose a piece, but what he does is he helps filmmakers tell stories in compelling ways. What you're doing right now with this podcast is you're helping Margarita tell a story, you're helping me tell a story, and by discussing stories and the way our stories converge and diverge, they all work the same way. We all have conflicts. There are transformations we're trying to get to. Margarita has a particular type of magic that she delivers on stage, and as an interviewer,
thank you, Dave.
You have a particular type of magic that you deliver through your music and the other media that you work with, the spoken media, and it requires an intuitive knowledge of storytelling, whether or not you ever think about it in terms of conflict, transformation, authenticity, and magic. You could go through anything you do and probably map it onto that.
Yeah.
And that's my model, and if it works for you, great. There are some other good ones out there. And I've got my magic, which for me is story sailing, this particular vision, and I help people who are having trouble identifying their stories find them. And very often the stories are there, but
right.
they're just not in those particular silos and categories where they can figure out how they connect.
Right. And Dave, it's been said by a few folks that I've interviewed over the years that the idea of brand is not external. And I think story analogous to brand here, the stories are living inside of you. They're in your, the zeitgeist of the world you live in, your life, and your cumulative experience up to a certain point in time, and then reframing and retelling and all of that is baked into a lot of what you've just said. So thank you. That's great.
So when people are stuck, one thing besides calling Dave Bricker is to ask somebody that they know they've helped. So for instance, David Wolf, the magic I think you provide for me is that you help me connect my ideas with a bigger audience, is something that is not one of my skill sets. And I think it's magical. I still don't understand how the toilet flushes, but the idea of how you disseminate information through radio or podcast, that's a mystery. And you provide that magic. Plus you make it happen. You do these things with me. You know, Dave Bricker, at first he was just going to be the media producer, but then I found it was so much fun to have him on for color commentary and the male-female balance and all that. So I say, please stay and play, and he does. So he and I become this synergistic thing. And I think that's the transformation as well. We've come from one business to, from each our own businesses to something better because it's combined.
Yeah, it's co-evolutionary for us. That's
it
true.
Really has been. And so I think the idea of, if you don't know your story, ask somebody who appreciates what you do, and they can find it.
Good advice.
So thank you. So Dave Bricker, in terms of where people go wrong with stories, what are the 3 pieces of advice you have about what to do or what not to do, whichever you're in the mood for?
Well, the first one we talked about was people in classic marketing parlance. We talk about sell the benefits, not the features, and too many people focus on the features. People focusing on the conflicts and not even mentioning the transformation. People buy transformation, and even though they have to deal with conflict, they're afraid of it. They find it unpleasant. And if you advertise it too much, especially out of context of the solution, you're going to reverse the effect that you're trying to have. I think the other piece, all of the pieces, authenticity. Are you just talking about how great your product is, or are you really demonstrating that you are relationship worthy, that you are the person who can provide the leadership that your client needs to help navigate their ship from conflict to transformation? And then the last one, magic, is something that we all struggle with. And, unless we're full of ourselves, and of course, narcissism is the only disease where the sicker you are, the better you feel. But
that's great.
But we have to learn to value ourselves, and we have to understand that each of us has unique qualities that sometimes are blind spots in certain respects, but that we have to turn our unique qualities into our unique strengths. Those are our magic. And there are plenty of people who are a bad fit for us, but there are plenty of people who are a good fit for us who will dovetail perfectly with that magic. So there's a spiritual / self-esteem factor that goes along with, because if you can't recognize your own value, you're going to have trouble selling anything, or beyond the idea of selling, of providing real value.
Yeah.
Well, that's agreed. So one of the things that I see lots of new entrepreneurs doing is they have a resume or a bio that's all about me. Now, one of our friends wrote the book, Bruce Turkel, all about them. So give us a tip about how someone can talk about themselves, whether in a one-on-one conversation or on a bio or resume. What is the secret of selling that magical transformation to our clients?
Well, in my work in publishing, I've worked with a number of memoir writers. And I've written one myself, and I think of memoir as the extreme sport for writers. And the reason for that is reading a book by somebody who talks about themselves for 350 pages is like the world's longest bad date. And so you can write your story, but you have to write and tell and share your story in a way that is meaningful to other people. And so writing a memoir is a way of extracting meaning, shareable meaning from your own life. It's not a gigantic self-celebration. And I think there's the advice. I told my story at the beginning of this interview. I tried to keep it short and sweet. People find it interesting. They like the sailing stories. I could go on and on and on. I wrote a book about that. If you're interested, buy my book. I'm here to talk about story sailing and its value to you and your listeners. And I'm not here to go, hey, I sailed a boat here and sailed a boat there and was in a storm here. And are you awake? Shall I continue? I mean, it's not about me.
So if somebody wants to learn more about you and wants to work with you or just share your ideas, tell us about all the various books and the various things that at this point our listeners can seek you out for.
Well, the easiest way, I'll be pretty quick with them. I just released books 7 and 8 last year.
And I love them.
The relevant book is called The Story, a voyage to the islands of connection and engagement for writers, speakers, professionals, and visionaries. And it's a nonfiction book wrapped in a novel where a bunch of characters from diverse business backgrounds end up stranded on an island. They're rescued by this quirky guy on an old wooden schooner, and they go sailing with him for 10 days instead of the workshop that they had arrived there to do because their teacher didn't show up, and they learn all about storytelling. So I thought there are plenty of books about storytelling. Why not use a story to teach about storytelling? The other book is called Publisher's Guide to Book Anatomy, and it explains the difference between a foreword and an introduction and a preface and a prologue and so on, because no book like that exists and every writer needs one. So hopefully it will benefit.
That's a subject of interest. Yeah. It doesn't exist anywhere.
And it's interesting because as soon as you mention it to people, they go, oh, wow, I need that. But they never realize they need it. It's like the original iPod, right? Everyone was fine without one, and then they realized they needed it.
Right. It's the thing you don't know you need until you need it. Yeah.
Hopefully at some point everyone will have one on their desk next to their thesaurus. There's also a book called The Writer's Guide to Powerful Prose, which talks about a lot of the writing patterns that people fall into that make them sound just like every other writer. And it's a fun little book for about $10, just full of writing tips.
Wow.
And the other relevant book is called The Blue Monk. When I was in my 20s, my sailboat was named after the Thelonious Monk tune called The Blue Monk.
Yep.
And it's just my coming-of-age sailing story memoir. And that one won an independent publishing award for what it's worth. And they're all available on Amazon, along with some novels that were kind of practice runs for me.
That's cool.
The publishing side. I have a resource for publishers called theworldsgreatestbook.com. I'm not updating it anymore, but there's over 100 articles there on writing, publishing, and book design. And I've got over 500,000 page views on that blog. There's davebricker.com, which has fairly up-to-date stuff, and I'm going to be phasing that into a new site called storysailing.com, which I'll be launching in a couple of more weeks.
Well, I can't wait to see that one. I've read all your books, and I'm halfway through Blue Monk. That one, for some reason, there's a word in Spanish, I go sad. Just like it took me forever to read Story, because I was into the characters. That's the same thing with the Blue Monk. It's taking me forever, and I don't want it to end. I'm enjoying it. So that's lovely.
Well, thank you. And I'm developing an online course, Storytelling for Business Leaders, which uses some of the same characters as are in the story.
And that was partly at my request because I was grieving these characters. So he brought them back to life for me. Thank you, Dave Bricker. So as we're winding down, I know that you have a mentor, and I'd love you to honor your mentor and say something about your mentor and a bit of a final word for our audience, our entrepreneurs.
Well, I have had so many mentors. One was Strider, who in the book, who's a compendium of myself, and a real life character I met by the name of John Nation, who's still kicking around and who I'm still in touch with. I'm very grateful to him. And then Margarita, in the speaking industry, you've probably been my biggest mentor and supporter.
Aww.
And
well, I'm certainly your biggest fan. Other than your wife and daughter.
Shout out to you. And I could go on and talk about Bruce Turkel and Caroline de Posada and her late father, to the extent that I got to know him, and George Walther and Kelly Swanson, and the National Speaking Association folks have just been fantastic to me. And I'm sure that there are people who I'm going to be appalled that I left out, but I know time is short, but they're not just friends. These are all mentors. These are people who actively participate in that bootstrapping process with me, who we tear up each other's ideas and put them back together. It's this wonderful ongoing mastermind that I'm a part of, and I'm very grateful for.
Yeah, I don't write anything without having Dave, and often Dave and Gato look at it, because everything's always better with someone else's eyes and heart and soul in it. And actually, David Wolf looks at my stuff as well. Everyone has something different to offer. So, sir, Dave Bricker, final words of wisdom for our audience who needs you.
I'm out.
You're out.
Wisdom, you guys have drained me.
Another water. It's another water metaphor.
I would say, look, if go out and find your story. I don't care if you find it in the next cubicle or the next mountain range. Life is too short, and life is an amazing opportunity, and you can explain it any way you want, whether you're religious or not. I don't care, but life is here to be lived. Step off the sidewalk onto the grass. The woods are just behind your house. Go take a walk and see the world, live some life, and bring something home worth sharing.
What I heard from that was step up.
Yeah,
I did too. I heard the same thing. Step off, step up. It's all websites that we can find you. Those listening can locate you easily, Dave.
DaveBricker.com, theworldsgreatestbook.com, and the new one that I haven't quite launched yet is storysailing.com.
Beautiful.
Can't wait. Well, thank you, Dave Bricker, for talking with us and helping entrepreneurs everywhere. And I can't wait till we interview you again. I'm assuming you'll say yes when we ask again, right?
I don't know about this free consulting thing, but yeah, we'll give it a try.
Oh, he's on to us. Oh, no.
You guys have both been delightful to deal with. It's my pleasure to participate and share and engage anytime.
Thanks, David.
Thank you, Dave Bricker. I love you. Bye.
Be well.
Ciao.
Thanks for listening to Step Up with Dr. Margarita Gurry. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes and visit redshoeinstitute.com for more information about Dr. Margarita Gurry and the work she does.